Hello, folks. It's Amir Latif from Blue Octopus. I want to welcome everyone who's joined into this webinar. We're still getting quite a lot of people just joining in. So I'll get started now in terms of introducing to you Simon Halkyard, who is our guest speaker in this webinar. Simon is the resourcing manager at their head office for Asda. And the webinar today is talking about hiring talent in an Instagram world. So Simon will go through a presentation. I'm also joined by my colleague Hannah Woodruff, who's doing all the support in terms of taking your questions. And to give everyone an idea where you can type in your questions, you'll notice at the toolbar for Zoom, there's a Q&A chat box. So if you click onto that, you can type in your questions there. Time permitting, what we will do is we will take some of your questions live that Simon and I will be able to answer right then and there. There's a poll that I'll be running towards the end of the webinar too, so please indulge me in completing this poll. It allows us to structure our future webinars better too, so it's always good to know what things are topical. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Simon now. Simon, I'm just going to unmute you now, and I will go on mute, and if you just cue me for the next slides.
Great, thank you, Amir. So my name's Simon Halkyard. I'm the resourcing manager for Asda's head office in Leeds. And before I start this presentation, I'd really like just to first of all say this is not a case study. What I'm going to talk through today is something that I'm struggling with, my business is struggling to achieve, and a lot of businesses out there are struggling to achieve. So this is something that I'm right in the middle of at the moment, but something that I'm really genuinely passionate about and something that I think is important if we're going to be relevant in talent acquisition moving forward. This presentation will only last about 15 minutes. I've actually been doing a lot of research on Generation Z, and apparently attention spans are dropping all the time. So it'll be about 15 minutes, so hopefully we can get through everything in that time zone. Please, can we see the next slide? So what do I mean by an Instagram world? Well, what I mean is Facebook launched and changed the way we communicate. Mobile phones launched, and they've changed the way we communicate. They add filters now to everything. I think we're at the point now where we've almost forgotten what's real and what's not. We now get more information from Facebook, for example, than we get from anywhere else. And this kind of information and news is not regulated, it's not real. Sometimes it's real, it's via people, it's with agendas, it's via bots. It's a whole range of things. And then you add on top of that Facebook will use its algorithms to feed us more of what it thinks we like. So if you lean left politically, it will feed you more of that. If you lean right, it will feed you a diet of that. And we end up with echo chambers of misinformation. And also we kind of cement our views, I suppose, as well, because it's not particularly healthy not to have a balanced amount of information. But that's what we're finding. And I think if you look at politics, it's a great example of that, especially over the last few years. No matter what your politics are, we've seen the public's trust in governments, in leaders, in corporations diminish. And phrases like fake news and alternative facts are now part of the lexicon, and we use them all the time. And I think we have got to that point where we're not quite sure what's real and what's not. Next slide, please. So I also think recruitment is similar to the outside world in terms of it's a mirror image. We are using tech for everything that we do in recruitment, and we're also using social media as our conduit to get through all our content and our information. And I also think that, like in our social lives, the kind of information that we are pushing out there is not always 100% authentic. If you look on LinkedIn right now, you'll probably see more pictures of bake sales than you will of actual robust job adverts. In a few weeks, you'll probably see more Christmas jumper pictures than you will people talking about the problems they have in their business that they need to fix or the challenges that they want people to rise to. And maybe it's just me, but I do think that candidates want that. I think candidates want problems to solve and challenges to fix. I think that's why we have a job in the first place. And I think we're underestimating with the content we're pushing out there what they really want. And I think, again, you know, their faith in us is diminishing because what we're posting isn't real, whether that's in webinars, whether that's on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is. Next slide, please. However, one thing is true is that it's working in our social lives. If you look at our social lives, we love to post illusions of who we want people to think we are, living our best lives, using airbrushing on filters, on pictures, basically just showing our greatest hits to people. And it's interesting that as a population, we've accepted that. And that's something that we are quite happy with. And you know, I've met people that I've been friends with on Facebook, and when I've met them face to face, they don't look anything like that. And maybe I'm just too English to say anything, but I think we all know people like that, and it happens all the time. I don't think it's healthy, but it's interesting that we have accepted it. But I think crucially for our careers, we crave reality. And we crave reality because when it comes to our careers, we have to live them. You know, they're not a Twitter feed. It's not something you can fake. But because we're so good at airbrushing in our social lives now, we can spot what's inauthentic when it comes to the hiring process and joining a new business. And we know that it doesn't resonate because when it comes to the jobs, we do want the reality. And I've posted 2 pictures up here, which I think are a really good metaphor for it, for my personal life. And on the first picture, this was taken by a professional portrait taken a few years ago. And anybody that's got children that's on this webinar will probably know that to get 3 kids pointing forward, smiling without ketchup on their tops is an achievement in itself. And it was quite a stressful day to actually get this image. And I think it was only about 4 or 5 seconds that we were all smiling. So whenever I look at this picture, I see the kind of the day that went behind it, not the kind of image that it's showing. And on top of that, when I actually got this picture back from the photographer and put it up on my wall, I thought I didn't look too bad on this one. And then when I looked further, I noticed that he'd whitened teeth, he'd taken pigmentation out of skin. And when I spoke to him about it, he said, yeah, that's our enhanced package. And, you know, it's free of charge, which I just found amazing. And even went as far to say they did more work on my face than my dad. And my dad's 70, so that was a bit disappointing in itself. But it was amazing that, you know, that's something that people do now. And if in America, they're in actual schools now, when kids have their pictures taken, the annual school picture. In some American schools, parents have the options for an airbrushing package where you can actually make your imperfect children perfect with beautification, which just is stunning, but it just shows you how far we're going with this. And the second picture is totally opposite. And the second picture, I take a lot of pictures at home and I always try and do it in the moment. And this is a typical picture that I would take, which is out of focus, a bit blurry, funny, loving, you know, it's nuanced. And I think that's what we want in our jobs, but I don't think it's what we're giving people. I think what we're giving people is that top image. We're giving that surface image of come and join our business and have your portrait taken like in this first picture at the top. And I just don't think that it's resonating with candidates anymore. And I think the results that we're getting from candidates to our jobs, whether we're getting fewer results from them, is showing. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, how do we hire in an Instagram world? Well, I've long since believed that we do it through a culture of hiring. A culture of hiring is when everyone in your business is a recruiter and it recognizes that they play a part in recruitment. Now, this has to be done for everyone. So this comes from C-suite down. And this goes back to the point that I mentioned at the beginning, that I've not achieved this in the business that I work for. I've not established it yet. And the reason is because that's really hard. You know, we struggle at the moment in talent acquisition functions with the speed that recruitment is changing, just to keep our own HR and people teams updated with what modern recruitment looks like. So to get everybody engaged in it is incredibly hard. And then on top of that, you've also got the fact that for generations, we've been pre-programmed to think that recruitment is compartmentalized to recruitment teams and that it's just recruitment teams that do it. But I think as I've shown in some of the other slides, candidates don't want to hear from recruitment teams. Candidates want to hear from their peers. They want to hear from people that are doing the jobs that they're doing. You know, a peer is someone that has real credibility with candidates. I think it's about time we realise that they don't want to hear from a recruitment team. And without to be disrespectful, they don't want to hear from HR. They don't want to even hear from leadership. If you're a web developer, you want to hear from a web developer, because in the world we live in now with so much fake news and fake information, they're the people that have the credibility to really break through this wall of noise that they have at the moment. A couple of years ago, I watched a documentary on Netflix that was about Barack Obama, and he said something really interesting that really sat with me. And it was that sometimes we think people are motivated only by money or power or these concrete incentives, but that people are also motivated by stories. And I truly believe that that's right. I think when it comes to moving to a new job, I think there are rational and also emotional reasons why you join a job. And those rational reasons might be where it's located, it might be the salary, but there are also emotional ones. And I think there even can be a stronger pull. They can be things like, what am I going to actually achieve in this job that's going to make a difference? What problem am I going to fix that's actually going to make my job worthwhile? And those are the things, the emotional things, that I don't think we're really pushing through. So I certainly think from my perspective, if we're going to hire in an Instagram world, it's going to be everybody that's going to do it, from the top of your business all the way down. Next slide, please. Now, in order to get the best out of your culture of hiring, I think you have to have an employer brand. Your employer brand comes first. Now, I'm not a self-appointed recruitment employer brand expert. I think there are far too many of them out there. Ironically, I actually live with somebody who works on employer brand for a living, and she loves to tell me that I'm not an expert on it. So I'll take her word for it, and I think she's right. I think there are far too many recruiters out there trying to create employer brands for their businesses, when in fact you can't create an employer brand. An employer brand exists within every single one of our businesses. It's the sum parts of everybody in our businesses, whether we like it or not. We can't create it. It's not something that you can just put together. And it reminds me of an anecdote I heard quite a few years ago, which when this man arrives at the gates of heaven, and when he gets there, he meets the devil, and the devil says, yeah, you don't want to go in there. You know, it's full of clouds and it's just boring. You're not going to enjoy it. What you need to do, you need to come to hell, because in hell, all the beer's cold. We've got amazing cars that you can use, and the restaurants are awesome. And the guy goes, do you know what? That sounds amazing. Yeah, I'm gonna go to hell. Okay, no problem. Next day he arrives at hell, and it's oppressively hot, and it's all fire and brimstone. And finally, he gets up to the chair where the devil is. And he says, what's going on? Where's the nice restaurants? And the devil says, oh, well, yesterday I was hiring, but today you're staff. And I think that's what we're often doing. We're giving two different images of what a role is when we're recruiting and what a role is when you actually join. So I do think you need the employer brand, because that's how you actually define and articulate your culture of hiring. It comes from your employer brand. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is something that I'm still struggling with, because it's very easy for me to say, well, you need an employer brand and you need a culture of hiring, and they are so hard to get into place. But one thing that you can do is you can do your own bit. You can push your employer brand. You are part of your employer brand. So you can actually articulate it yourself. And if we all do that, then we will get to that level of a culture of hiring. But we're not doing it enough. So what I would say is, the next time that you do a piece of content, the next time you do a talk or a webinar or whatever it is, just make sure that at least you yourself make sure that your employer brand is a little bit less like this. Next slide, please. And a little bit more like this. I should probably point out, this is my daughter. It's not just a random 7-year-old. That could get me in trouble. And I think that's really important. I think what we need to do is make sure that we narrow these two things. And whether, you know, from this presentation, you take the moral and ethical reasons of why we need to be authentic, have a look at the commercial reasons. Because at the moment, we have more people leaving our jobs in the first 3 months than at any other time. And the reason that they leave our jobs, and they tell us this, is because the role just wasn't what I expected it to be. The role isn't what you sold me through the recruitment process. And that costs businesses a lot of money. If we get that right, if we start making our hiring processes better, we'll get the right responses. And as I said, it's very hard to do. I've had issues recently where I saw our new onboarding site, and I looked at our new onboarding site for Asda, and I thought, well, it's really good and the content's good. But then I went to speak to my manager and I said, you know, it's good, but it's just not cool or funky. And first of all, I got embarrassed for using the words cool and funky for the first time since 1998. But after that, my manager said, well, we're not cool or funky. We're a really good business, but we're a big corporate entity. Why would we put jazz hands on it? And it just shows you that even when you're aware of these things, there's always a desire to be seduced by putting jazz hands over everything and trying to oversell it. So I'd just leave you with the thought that if we are authentic, if we can use our employer, if we can use a culture of hiring, we'll get more back from our candidates. Next slide, please.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. Really appreciate this. And very useful to see that. And I absolutely loved your slides, by the way. So put a nice little human touch to this. We have a few questions that have come in. So Simon, if you're okay, we'll take some of these questions now.
Yeah, sure.
But before we did that, there's a question that I had in my head too. I'm going to volunteer myself first. And this is more to do with how technology and automation is playing a part or compromising potentially the human touch when companies are trying to put a value or their whole culture across to a wider audience. How do you compromise or balance the two out?
Well, I think it's hard. I mean, looking at talent acquisition, we use technology now more than anything. But I do think we're also forgetting just how imperfect we are as humans and the mistakes that we make. So the way that I like to think of it is we should definitely use technology, but for the automated parts of the processes, for the heavy lifting, but you still need to have that human touch because, as I said before, that's what candidates are craving. You know, they want that human touch and it's important. But equally, you know, we could turn around and say, well, it all needs to be done by humans. But humans are making mistakes. And if you work in a business like mine, where you get hundreds of applications for jobs and you're sifting through those applications, you don't have 10 minutes for each one. And you can make mistakes and you do have biases. So I think if you use the right technology at the right time, it can be successful. It's just how much you use and when you use it.
Perfect. Thank you. And folks, by the way, so as I mentioned before, please do type in your questions in the Q&A box. So we've allocated this time now to take some of these questions live. So I'll start off with the first one I've got here. So this question says, so if they don't want to hear from recruiters or HR, do you think talent acquisition still has a key part to play in hiring? And if so, what part do you think they play?
It does, because I still need a job. But I think it does. And I think we're playing the wrong part. Because I genuinely think that the part that talent acquisition should play is by partnering hiring teams and managers, not serving them and not.
Excellent. So next question I have is, how do you find a global employer brand as a multi-branded company where each brand has their own identity? Sorry, we'll just had a little bit. Simon's just going to use my headset now. 1 second.
Sorry, I just had a technical problem there. Yeah, I was just saying that for me now, I think we play a bigger role, but we play a role in partnering with hiring teams and making sure that we give them the education of how they actually produce a culture of hiring and how they actually talk to candidates and deal with them. So I still think that we have a huge part to play. I just think it's different to the one that we're playing at the moment. And I think at the moment, recruitment teams are often seen as cost-saving teams, not teams that have an impact on the business. And I think that's where we need to go. So the next question was, you mentioned that employees want career reality in a world of social media filtering. Surely employees want candidate reality as well. And I think they do. And I think that's one of the problems. I think you also get, when candidates go for interviews, you know, candidates are not being authentic as well. And I think, you know, that's another conversation. I think it's an interesting one because you have businesses and employees that are both not being honest with themselves at some points. But yeah, I mean, that's a difficult one. I think the interview process will always have filters on it, but I think we need to educate candidates that we want to see the real them and make sure that they feel comfortable to show themselves. So the next one was, how do you find a global employer brand as a multi-branded company where each brand has its own identity? As I said, I'm not an employer brand expert, but I think it doesn't have to be a fixed thing. I think with employer brand, sometimes we think it's just one thing, but it isn't. We can't expect that our employer brand is the same for C-suite as it would be for me in HR, or as it would be for somebody in our stores. I think it's different, but it's all part of the same thing.
Excellent. Thank you for those questions, folks. And once again, if you have any others, I am going to put up Simon's contact details and my contact details. You will be able to reach out directly to us. I did promise everyone a poll, so you will be receiving that on your screens just right now. And you are able to, by the way, select multiple options. And on here, essentially, it's basically our chance to help you guys out too with further knowledge. So the question is, which of the following core subject matters would you like to speak to a Blue Octopus team member about? I've got quite a few options there. Please do select any of those that you are interested in, and then we'll be happy to help you there. I'll let this run for maybe 10 more seconds, and then I'll close the poll. I'm just going to share the results with everyone here too, so that people get a chance to see what's the common interest or theme here. So interestingly, by a significant majority, overall optimization of recruitment process came out quite a bit ahead. Also improved reporting and visibility. There's other votes in for different options to reducing time to hire came up there. So that's interesting. Thank you for that. I hope you found this webinar very useful. And I am going to put up the contact details for Simon up here. My colleague Hannah is also on the chat box, put up a link where you are able to book in a time to speak to a consultant here at Blue Octopus. So if you click on that link, you'll be able to schedule that in. But Simon's email address is there. He's given me permission to allow you guys to actually contact him directly. So please do so. And also mine are there too. Our next webinar, by the way, is on the 3rd of December. And that's with Karen Rosington. The topic is focusing around employee value proposition. So if that is of interest, please look out for it in your email inboxes. We will be sending out the webinar registration links for that. From myself and everyone at Blue Octopus, I want to thank you guys once again for joining in this webinar. Simon, I want to thank you also for this webinar. If you'd like to say a few words yourself, Simon, so I'll pass it over to you.
No, thank you for listening. And if anyone's got any questions, by all means, just email me directly and I'll definitely respond. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I forgot to thank my colleague Hannah for taking all the questions and giving the support here. Hope everyone has a wonderful Tuesday, and thank you for listening to us. Take care. Bye-bye.